Tonight, a town hall with U.S. candidate for Senate, Diane Sare, on Live One TV. And for our viewers who are tuning in, we are here with New York U.S. Senate candidate, Diane Sare. Welcome, Diane. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be speaking to people in Queens.
Yeah, we are in Queens, New York. We're about 15 minutes from Manhattan proper. We're here with a studio audience, and we're ready to do our town hall with you. We do have questions from the audience. I have a few also. But would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about your campaign first?
Sure, I can say a little bit. I am a candidate, as you already said, for U.S. Senate. I'm running as an independent candidate under the LaRouche party line. And that's a big deal in the state of New York because in the 2019 through 2020, oops, and I have a dog here that's visiting as well. In the 2019 through 2020 budget, they decided to do something really scandalous with matching funds, and they set up a kitty, which is about, I don't know, Suzanne will be able to tell you the details, $100 million or something, where they're going to give candidates matching funds, except if you're running for federal office, as I am, for U.S. Senate or for the House, you're not eligible for matching funds, but regardless, they tripled the signature requirement, saying that they don't want to give, the state of New York, suddenly they're very concerned about how they use taxpayer money. So they don't want to give matching funds. They don't want to give taxpayer money to what they deem are frivolous candidates, which they define as people whose views don't conform with the majority opinion of voters in the state of New York. I mean, it's really convoluted and crazy. The upshot was that the signature requirement to run in a statewide race went from 15,000, which is what it is for Democrat, Republican, conservative, and working families parties, to 45,000. So the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, they all lost their ballot status. It's a very, very difficult task. The Kennedy campaign spent literally millions of dollars to get on the ballot. My campaign spent a fraction of that because my supporters are volunteers. I will say less than $100,000, $60,000 to $80,000 on all the expenses of New York, tolls and Airbnbs and travel, meals, and all that kind of printing, a huge cost of petitioning, believe it or not. So getting on the ballot is huge, and there is no Libertarian or Green Party or Independence Party Senate candidate anymore because of this, which I think is an outrage. We turned in a little shy of 70,000 signatures. So I am on the ballot. I'll be on the ballot in November. I am the only peace candidate for U.S. Senate. Gillibrand is a total warmonger. She is part of what Eisenhower would have called the military-industrial complex. The Republican candidate was a very bad cop. I don't consider myself particularly to be anti-police. They've been dealt a raw deal since there's no mental health care and everything else. But this guy apparently was written up for excessive use of force on multiple occasions and finally coerced a confession out of a man who was innocent, who served wrongly 21 years in prison. So, and the name of the guy is Mike Sapercone, by the way. So do you want someone representing you in the U.S. Senate with that kind of record? Or Kristen Gillibrand, who was, and we'll talk about that later on your Twitter space about her record. But it's not just them. Look, we right now don't have a president, and we don't have, in my opinion, a qualified presidential candidate. You may argue that some are less bad than others. That's true. But what you see going on is an assault against the institution of the presidency with the attempted assassination of Trump, And then apparently it was Barack Obama, which I think really means Tony Blair, and the Clintons told Biden he had to leave to make way for Kamala Harris, who's probably more clueless than Joe Biden, to become the nominee, or they were going to remove him under the 25th Amendment. Now, frankly, he should have been removed under the 25th Amendment about a week after he took office. And it leaves you wondering, here we are on the brink of a nuclear war with Russia. We are funding a genocide in Gaza. We had a disgusting spectacle of Bibi Netanyahu addressing our Congress. The whole world thinks we've gone mad. We've lost all moral authority, and we don't have a president. So I'm running for US Senate. I have a young friend, Jose Vega, who's running for Congress for the same reason, which is to provide some leadership and to set a standard not only for the US Senate, but frankly, what the President of the United States actually should be working on and what the policy of the nation actually should be.
Okay, and today's particularly serious. As people know, Israel has bombed Beirut, Lebanon.
Right.
So this war is extended into Beirut. We might get into that later. We do have questions for you. We do have one request, Diane. We have a lot of animal fans here, dog fans. Is your dog still there? People would just like to see your dog. If the dog's there.
Yeah, they want to see him. Baxter, come here. Can you come over here? I might have to turn the camera so you can see him. He's, let's see here. Can we get him into the camera? Do you see him?
We do. Hi, Baxter. That's it.
There he
Seems
is.
pretty good. Calm.
Yeah.
Great.
We had an unhappy incident last night. He got sprayed by a skunk.
Wow.
He doesn't
And
quite
what do you
smell
do
like.
after that? Is there shampoos and things you needed to use?
Well, apparently there is some skunk spray, but we didn't, I mean, anti-skunk spray. We didn't find that. We looked it up online, and I had tried this before with a previous dog. It works pretty well, which is hydrogen peroxide, baking soda, and dish soap. So we spent about an hour washing him last night. There's still a little bit of a skunk smell, but it adds to his charm.
Uh-huh. Diane, please, let's get to the questions. I'd like to ask you, do you consider yourself a candidate who is for free speech?
Yes, emphatically yes. And while we are losing it and there's terrible censorship in the social media, which should not occur, look, these so-called platforms are called a platform because in our new day and age, we don't have a town square. There's not a place. People live in these funny communities where you get in your car and you drive to the grocery store, you drive to the shopping mall. They still exist, of course, across New York and elsewhere, where everyone knows the difference between a town where you go and there's an actual downtown and the post office is there and the grocery store is there and all the little shops and the neighbors see each other regularly. That doesn't exist commonly. So we now have social media, which was supposed to function like that, which means the same free speech rules should apply, but as we see, they don't. And I saw, for example, a post on TikTok by someone, Colonel Wilkerson, who was the personal assistant or secretary for Colin Powell. I mean, he's certainly an established, serious military figure who knows something about intelligence. He made a little TikTok video saying that in his entire career and now, you could never trust anything the Israelis said. They were known for being pathological liars. So I tried to put a little heart to like his post, and it wouldn't let me do it. It said, this post may violate our community standards, you're not allowed. So in that sense, we don't really have freedom of speech, but on the other hand, it is in our Constitution. So people can go to, when your congressman is having a town hall, you can get up and disagree with them. You don't go to jail for that. You can make a picket sign and walk on any public sidewalk and express your view. And frankly, we don't have enough Americans doing this. So I think we do have free speech. It is being eroded. The same standard of free speech should apply to platforms that are accessible in the public domain as does apply to public sidewalks, that kind of thing. And I think Americans should exercise their free speech. That's very important.
In 2013, NSA and CIA contractor worker Edward Snowden took many top secret files out and disclosed them to 3 journalists, and they were shared around the world. Former Vice President Al Gore said, "It's true that what Snowden did, he broke the law, and you can't say that's okay. However, he did so to reveal far more serious crimes that were being committed against the American people. In other words, all of our private records, phone calls, and emails are being recorded, and it turned out later analyzed by the US government." The Congress, just 2 months ago, reauthorized this bulk warrantless surveillance, as it's called, in Section 702. Is that something they would have your vote on, or would you have voted against that?
No, I would absolutely have voted against that. I mean, it's really so outrageous. And frankly, people like Ed Snowden, I was just listening to an interview with Bill Binney, who I think was sort of a mentor to Snowden. Bill Binney was the head of one of the divisions at the NSA, and he quit in protest over that they allowed 9/11 to occur. At least, I'll say at least allowed 9/11 to occur. And he said, well, people say whistleblowers, Chelsea Manning, and they didn't do things legally. They should have tried every legal. He said, we tried every legal remedy first. We wrote documents. We went to the intelligence agencies. We went to the Congress. We did everything legally. And then the FBI, in his case, Binney, they raided our house. Then we became targets. So then what do you mean legal? All you can do is then go public in whatever way you can at great risk to your own security and livelihood if you're a patriot. And I believe that these whistleblowers are patriots.
Okay, and let's go to question number 2, and then people from the audience. Are you for deregulating the energy industry? People think that it would help the economy and lower gas prices. For example, if we opened up the Keystone Pipeline. But here in New York, it's very important too. But first question, are you for deregulating the energy industry?
No, and I don't think it should have been as deregulated as it. I mean, look, we got Enron from this. For people who remember, for younger people, you may not, but it used to be very regulated, and there were certain standards and margins of profit, and in some case, state-owned companies or energy authorities, which were designed to. There are certain things that are life necessities. Energy is one of them. Food is another one. Water. I don't think these things really should be privately regulated. Maybe you have a combination where you can have a private company, but there have to be strictly enforced standards. What happened with Enron is I think they split apart the production of energy, the supply of energy, and the billing, or something like that. They broke it into pieces. And then the idea was to increase the price by making energy cheap, right? Buy cheap, sell dear, the magic of the marketplace, the law of supply and demand. So if you can make energy really hard to come by burning down power lines, then you can jack the price up. We saw this in Texas. It didn't die with Enron. You remember a couple years ago when they had the horrible blackout because they got a cold flash and the windmills and the power delivery systems froze. I think over 600 people died. And they had a similar power company that decided, since power was scarce, they were going to gouge the prices. So people suddenly discovered they had a $10,000 electricity bill. And I think you cannot have that. I think we have to regulate energy. And we have to make sure that there is adequate supply of energy, which is also in jeopardy, especially since the shutdown of Indian Point.
We have some members of the audience, Diane. I'd like to introduce you to Omar. Omar, please come in and give your question to the candidate. Stand right here so you're in the camera. That's it, a little more
Hi,
forward.
Omar.
And well, yeah, well, we know we each other, Diane, just don't see each other as often. But again, congratulations for getting on the ballot twice. Unexpected is so flabbergasted. But so the question, and I was told to never entertain the idea of failure, and I certainly don't. I do envision you getting into the Senate. I do have high hopes that you will bring a lot of those policy ideas to bear, energy, the surveillance state, what have you. But taking out like you or whether or not you're in the Senate, what do you envision ultimately as victory come say next year, 2025, whether or not you're in the Senate? What are your thoughts on victory?
That's a really good question. Because clearly, if I get into the Senate, I'm going to say I would be a minority would be an understatement. I might be 1 out of 100 or 2 out of 100 on various issues. So the victory is that the United States makes a great shift in the next few months to recognize that what is happening with the BRICS nations, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, now joined by Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, United Arab Emirates, perhaps Saudi Arabia, that this actually is a reflection of what used to be the American system. It's a reflection of the principles of the American Revolution, of people getting out from under the heel of tyranny, of colonialism. And I think if Americans kind of caught the, what was that ad for something, catch the breeze or catch the wave or whatever it was they used to say, if we caught this new breath of freedom, which frankly we inspired in the first place when we defeated the British Empire. But this, it could change the United States. It could change our relationship to the world. Instead of being these pompous jerks who are bullying everybody, we could say that this is the American system, and we want to have good relations with all these countries. We want to eradicate poverty. We're going to work with you. There's things that nations can cooperate on, and we would, I think, be much happier, and we'd have a much higher standard of living. So that's what I would consider a victory, is that we come back to that identity. And instead of killing people all over the planet, we're working with people all over the planet for economic development.
We have another question from Nardo, please.
My question is, when you become a senator, which law you're going to introduce first, the first one, and which law you're going to demote it, you're going to delete it? I don't know.
That sounds
Which
like
law
a
would
great,
I get rid of?
it's a great question. Which law would
Yeah.
you like to see enacted first, and which one would you like to see deleted first? Good question, I think.
All right. Well, the first
Great.
law I would like to get enacted is the reinstatement of the Glass-Steagall Act, the old FDR Glass-Steagall Act, where you separate the banks again, the commercial, savings and loan, regular banks that people have their mortgages and things in, from the investment and speculative banks. Because if you did that, you'd have to go through all their books. So we would get an orderly bankruptcy reorganization. And that would be the first step toward taking the wind out of the windbags, the billionaires, big financiers who are running this mess. The first law that I would like to repeal, that's very interesting. One, I don't know if we rejoined the Paris climate accords or not. I think we did. I think that was an executive order of Joe Biden. So I would like to get out of the Paris Climate Accords. I think that's a total violation of sovereignty, and it is a genocidal policy to demand that countries cut energy production. Hi, Art.
I'm sorry, Diane, we have Art here.
Okay, hi, Diane. As you know, I've been doing a lot of the field
Hi.
campaigning for your campaign all over New York. But the main question is this, because in 2022, when you ran against Chuck Schumer, you made a big focus on Schumer in the campaign. And obviously, there's a lot we could be saying about Gillibrand, but maybe there's a way you could accelerate or expand the focus on who and what Gillibrand really is. So motivating why people have to vote for you, as opposed to.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because this very evening we're going to have a Twitter space where we're going to take up some of the unsavory aspects of Kristen Gillibrand, who keeps a low profile, not because she's not there, but she's sort of a submarine in the intelligence community. And she's, frankly, I think, a very foul person. I met somebody petitioning who said he used to drive for her, and the conversations he heard from the back seat were absolutely hideous. But she never met a war she didn't want to fund. She is tied into British aerospace. Her father was the lawyer for the Nexium sex cult. So it's really pretty bad news, and we are going to be working on that. We're putting together a lot, and if people tune in tonight at 8:30, they'll get to hear some of where all this goes.
Another question too?
Yeah, sure. Just to add to that, when I was doing the petitioning campaign upstate, I did find out that probably the only major industries that still functioned were the military industries, like BAE Systems in Binghamton area, and Endicott or whatever it is now, as opposed to any kind of productive industry. So we should really keep a focus on that.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that on the Artemis program, which was really initiated and pushed under the Trump presidency to revive the space program, get us back to the moon and on to Mars, Artemis being the sister of Apollo, New York actually has 157 companies that are producing components and parts and various elements for the space program. New York is incredibly rich in high technology. So these companies that are producing the means of killing people today could be retooled to produce exactly components of the space program and also infrastructure that we urgently need.
We're going to go to something that's in the news almost every day right now, gender identity politics. Are you for the government backing transgender surgery?
No, and I also think it should be illegal before the age of 18. Putting young people on puberty blockers. I read an excellent book by a child psychiatrist, which means she has a medical degree, Dr. Miriam Grossman, who spoke of women who had transitioned to become men, supposedly, and had puberty blockers, had their breasts removed, all kinds. And this makes you infertile. You will never have children. And the woman who had been induced to do this at about the age of 12, they said, well, did the doctor inform you that you would not be able to bear children? She said, yeah, but I was 12 years old. I didn't want to have children. So the idea of allowing minors, of allowing people who haven't had an opportunity to think through the joys of being a parent or what they want to do with their life, but you're going to actually perform life-altering surgery, which leaves people in pain forever in 70% of the cases, I think is really criminal. And I think and what they are not doing is giving people the mental health care that they need. They're throwing everything under the rubric of, oh, you were born in the wrong body, and if we just address that, you wouldn't be depressed anymore. I think it's really cruel, barbaric, and perverse.
Moving right along. A lot of people find that one of the problems with Congress in the upper and the lower house is lobbyists. It seems I've even heard one estimate there are something like 700 lobbyists for each candidate. That can't be correct, but there are quite a few. Are you for regulating lobbyists, where applicable, as agents of foreign nations?
Well, if they are agents of foreign nations like AIPAC, which is one of the big ones, by the way, AIPAC is the #1 donor to Kristen Gillibrand, for people who don't know, American Israel Public Affairs Committee. That is a foreign lobbyist. How can it not be? American Israel, it's Israeli policy. They should have to register as a foreign agent. Now you have big lobbyists with Citibank, Bank of America. They should be regulated. Maybe we should say that the maximum that your congressmen are supposed to report gifts and things that they receive, or if the lobbyist buys you dinner or whatever, they probably should actually put a limit like $25. That's the maximum that any one of these people can treat you to, or give to your campaign. How about banning corporate contributions? Let's get rid of Citizens United. That would be a really good thing to get rid of.
Now, President Joe Biden had talked last year that Americans needed to buckle up, in other words, because of inflation. As it turned out, the United States taxpayer is not only sending weapons over to the Ukraine, but also paying the salaries of administration officials in the Ukraine government. Are you for paying the salaries of the Ukraine administration?
No, and especially when they're doing things like putting me and others on kill lists, including former President Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and 112 congressmen were all on a target list called Texty as Russian propagandists. And that does put us in harm's way, particularly as the war draws to an end, because Ukraine is losing. What happens when all these mercenaries, people who are fighting with these neo-Nazi regiments, come back to the United States, like the fellow in Charlottesville, who had been trained by the Azov battalion, and they're advocating doing violence to anyone who is accused of being a Russian propagandist. So we should absolutely not be funding their government, and we definitely should cut off funding if they're going to do things like that.
And would that include, as well as stopping the funding of salaries to the Ukraine government and sending weapons, would you open up diplomatic talks with Russia?
Absolutely. I heard what Biden said in the press conference after the NATO summit, and they said, would you be willing to talk to Putin? He said, oh, no, there's no reason. Why would I talk? Are you crazy? The guy has how many 1,600 or whatever it is nuclear warheads, and you don't think you want to talk to him? You'd rather just try and read his mind? That is absolutely criminal. Of course, we have to talk to Putin. And that's, by the way, one of the things that's very dangerous about putting nations like the nation of Iran on a quote unquote terror, or saying the nation is a terrorist nation. Once you do that, once you label someone a terrorist or a terrorist nation, you are no longer allowed to negotiate with them. It kicks in all kinds of things. So claiming that Putin is a terrorist, which the Senate actually tried to do a couple of years ago, that is really irresponsible.
We have another question. Are you for sending bombs to Israel? It seems like America is putting bombs. I believe we've been dropping bombs on more than 6 foreign countries. You wouldn't know it from our media here, but how about sending bombs to Israel?
No, no, I mean, they're committing genocide. The International Court of Justice considers it plausible that they're committing genocide. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Bibi Netanyahu and for the head of Hamas. I think that if we were sane, people could be prosecuted for sending weapons to Israel.
What about Iran? Because this is the latest talk right now. Even President Trump has expressed the possibility that the United States will go into a war with Iran. Are you for it? Are you? What? And if you're not,
Absolutely not. And by the way, short of using nuclear weapons, we wouldn't win. One of the things they don't want to talk about is what actually happened when Iran retaliated for the Israeli strike on the Iranian embassy in Damascus. And what they covered was that Iran launched all these drones, which were easily shot down. What they didn't cover was that Iran also sent, it was either 7 or 9 hypersonic missiles, which hit their targets in the Negev desert very precisely. Now, they were things like empty warehouses. Iran clearly didn't want to blow up the world or start World War III, but they did want to deliver a message. So the Iron Dome does not prevent Iran from hitting targets. I'm sure you're aware that I think it was Hezbollah released video footage of some very, very sensitive Israeli military and supply facilities, including in Haifa, an ammonia warehouse, which was supposed to be secret. If you hit that, that would be like a nuclear bomb. So Israel is in some trouble, and Netanyahu has to keep up a lot of bluff and bluster because he probably would go to jail otherwise. By the way, I should say, when he did his disgusting speech in the Congress and our disgusting representatives applauded him 58 times in an hour, there were some arrests made at that, and the arrests were made of family members of the hostages. There are, they say, 8 American hostages. 2 of them are deceased. Their families trying to get their bodies returned. So 6, I guess, living. And the family members are desperate for a deal. So they were just in the gallery. They'd been invited by some members of Congress. They had bright yellow T-shirts that said, "Seal the deal." And when there were standing ovations, they remained standing just a second longer than everyone else so that everyone could read their T-shirts. And the marshals came in, took them out, and arrested them. So for all the people who think, oh, Bibi Netanyahu is defending, what about the hostages? Well, the family members of the hostages are not big fans of Bibi Netanyahu. He seems to have no interest in a ceasefire deal that would free these people.
okay. And as we wrap up our town hall, I'd like to ask you, you've been traveling New York State, and there's so much to this state. There's so much beauty. Can you tell us a little bit about it? Because many of us would like to travel around. It's part of your campaign to become familiar with big and small towns. Tell us what you're learning and what you can about New York State.
Well, one, I have to say New York has these beautiful cities, and in Albany, Syracuse, Binghamton, Buffalo, what I love is going through these old neighborhoods with these beautiful Victorian houses, houses clearly where people lived who worked for the steel mills. And you can imagine when these cities were booming, how delightful it would have been to live there. You live on a street with a bunch of other families, you play on the street after dinner. It's quiet, it's peaceful, you don't have to worry about your kids being kidnapped. Um, it's really hard to imagine that now. And these cities, parts of them are just completely desolate and destroyed with boarded up buildings, dilapidated homes. It's heartbreaking. The other thing that New York has a lot of is farms, and apparently it has a very high percentage, more than most states, family-owned farms, not big conglomerates like Smithfield Food or whatever. Now, the state is losing 10% of its farms every 5 years. So there were in 2018 over 33,000 farms in the state of New York. Now it's down to about 30,000. I think this is a very serious crisis. And apparently, this year, between this year and 2 years ago, the farm income in the United States dropped by 40%. That's the biggest drop in farm income ever in history. And believe me, the price of things for farmers has not gone down. It's like everyone else. I also was informed by a farmer friend of mine that in 1971, the price for a bushel of corn, yeah, it was corn, was $3.40. That's what the farmers got paid. This year, it's $4. Now, what you could buy in 1971 with $3.40, you would need $28 to buy today. So the farmer should be getting paid 7 times more to keep up with inflation, and instead they're being paid the same amount or less. So anyone who thinks that there's going to be food on the table, and that's, by the way, not what you're paying. When you go to the grocery store, you're paying the middleman, you're paying the speculator. The farmer is not getting that money when you're paying $5 for a gallon of milk. Uh-oh, I can't hear you suddenly.
Thank you. Having a
Okay.
little microphone issue there. So here we are. November 5th is almost upon us, or we could say the election is already upon us. 3 more months of campaigning, or a little bit more than that. And have you noticed any statements coming out of your incumbent U.S. Senate Senator Kristen Gillibrand? Has she been campaigning or having anything to say?
No, I mean, she's not campaigning. She is putting out this email called a New York Minute, where she sends pictures of herself handing out cupcakes and small checks and saving people's Social Security. And then occasionally she'll be photographed with a cow because she's on the Agriculture Committee. But she's not, I mean, she's certainly not calling for peace or talks with Russia. In fact, she's very much in on this idea that we have this axis of evil. She was a prime co-sponsor of a bill that was so outrageous it didn't even get out of committee, called the Restrict Act, for which citizens could get a 25-year jail sentence and a $250,000 fine if you did anything or purchased technology in any amount that could benefit, let's see, China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, or North Korea. And I think I'm forgetting one country. I think it was 7 nations that are like on a hit parade. It's really evil. It's really destructive.
And she has been in the government for, at least in the Senate, for 15 years.
Yeah. And she was in the House for that, I think just 1 term, but it might have been more than that. So she's been in there for at least 17 years in Washington.
Wow. And can you tell me what her legacy is going to be?
Hopefully no one will remember her. I found that a lot of people today all over the state have no idea who she is, which is unfortunate because she's hurting them a lot. But they don't know her, and that's what I say. She's really sort of a submarine. She's submerged, and she has her little, you know, what do you want to call a missile launcher?
Most
Sending
people
out
don't even
poison.
know her. Okay, we have another question from the audience. John, your question, please, for Diane.
Well, it's actually a comment. I'm 74 years old, and I brought this up last time, but it wasn't recorded, the speech you gave last week. So I'll repeat it again. I grew up in the 60s, and my dad went to work in a factory, My mom stayed homeless. We had 10 kids in our family, and my mom finally went to work when we were all back in school, in grade school, and she, worked at the cafeteria. But in college, I only paid $250 for a semester. So you could go to college and get a good degree, and right now we don't have that kind of society.
Thank you for the question. Diane, any comment on that?
Just this thing about the cost of education, again, it's another ripoff, and we see from Columbia. Columbia is not a university, it's a hedge fund. It's a hedge fund on wheels that supplies people to the State Department. I mean, Hillary Clinton is teaching there, Victoria Nuland is teaching there, and then they're going to arrest students who protest the genocide. Now, I guess they've dropped the charges, but I learned when my mother passed away that my father, I grew up in Maine. My parents, actually families, both came from Maine. So Maine in the 60s did not have a medical school. So my father went to medical school at University of Vermont, and they treated him like an in-state student. So he got the discounted rate. My mother was getting her doctorate in biochemistry and working as a church musician. So my mother, working as a church musician, was able to put my father through medical school because it cost $695 per semester. Nowadays, I think one textbook might cost that. I can't hear you again.
I'd like to thank our audience who's come here to our town hall at Live One in Astoria, Queens, New York, and candidate Diane Sare, running for position of U.S. Senate in New York. And best of luck to you, Diane, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night.
You've been listening to candidate for U.S. Senate in New York, Diane Sare, and the LiveOne.tv Town Hall. You can follow Diane's campaign by going to sareforsenate.com. And don't forget to follow LiveOne.tv, accurate source of information on government, politics, and art.